perhaps so just a brief overview of the services that you provide in our region, that would be helpful for context. So with that in mind, I'm going to call in Shamara Smith.
Hello, I'm Shamara Smith. I am the transit planner here at SunTran.
Thank you, Shamara. I appreciate it. Happy to have you here today. And then Jessica Holsapple.
Good morning. I'm Jessica Holsapple. I'm the grant writer for Fellowship Square Tucson, which is part of Christian Care senior living communities across the state.
Thank you, Jessica. Glad you're able to join us as well. Let's see, Tony Bruno. Good morning, Tony. Can you hear me?
Yes, good morning. How are you?
I'm good. If you could go ahead and just do a brief introduction of who you are, the agency that you represent, and just a kind of brief overview of the services you provide in the region, that would be great.
So I'm Tony Bruno. I'm the Associate Director for Valley Assistance Services. We actually cover all of everything south of Pima Mine Road to Santa Cruz County. We also work in Santa Cruz County. We do health education and literacy, workforce development. We do a little bit of social isolation prevention, and we do non-emergency medical transport for our clients as well.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate that, Tony. And then I'm going to call on Irma.
Good morning. I'm Irma Llamas with Hope Incorporated. I have Steve here now along with me as well, and we're in behavioral health for Hope Incorporated.
Thank you, Irma and Steve. I appreciate you being here as well. And then Kimberly Trevino.
Let me unmute myself first. Kimberly Trevino from Catholic Community Services of Southern Arizona. I'm the grant writer.
Great. Thank you, Kim. Appreciate you being here as well. Let's see, Krishana.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Krishana Guy. I'm the grant writer for the City of Tucson Department of Transportation and Mobility, working in junction with SunTran.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate you being here as well. Let me see if I captured everyone in terms of introductions. I think I see one hand up, so I'm going to go ahead and call on Carmen. Go ahead, Carmen.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Carmen Johnson. I'm with Catholic Community Services. I serve adults with developmental disabilities in the community living program, as well as working in one of our shelters.
Great. Glad you're here as well. Thank you for being here. Let's see, Monica.
Hi, good morning. Monica Landgrave with the City of Tucson in the Transit Services Division. I'm a lead planner there, and thank you and happy to be here.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you being here as well. I'm Michael Alexander.
Mike Alexander, Transit Administrator for Town of Oro Valley's Sun Shuttle Dial-A-Ride.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate you being here as well. And then Shaylin Turney. Shaylin, can you hear me? Right. I think I'm going to circle back with Shaylin. I'm not sure if she's able to hear me at this time. Just want to make sure Steve Nath has an opportunity to introduce himself as well, because I know they're on a joint call with Irma. So Steve, if you can hear me, if you go ahead and introduce yourself, that'd be great.
He's on a phone call right now.
Oh, okay. All right. We'll let him introduce himself in just a little bit then. Let me just go ahead and circle back to Shaylin and see if Shaylin's able to hear me or connect at this time. All right. I believe Shaylin's from Project Amore. So when she's able to introduce herself, I'll let her speak to a little bit more about the services they provide. And of course, Steve Knapp is from Hope. So let's see if I missed anyone. Looks like I've captured everyone. So we're going to go ahead and conclude our introductions and move to the next item on the agenda, which is our in-kind forum. So just for awareness, regional planning efforts are enhanced by recording time donated by attendees, volunteers, and participants. PAG, of course, collects data on the time dedicated to those meetings and activities to apply for use as matching funds for grants and federal dollars. So if you are paid with federal dollars, whether in part or in full, please let us know now. This way we do not calculate that into our in-kind calculation. So thank you, Tony. I see you've acknowledged that you are paid through federal dollars. Let's see if I see anyone else. Right. And then, of course, if you weren't able to raise your hand through this platform, please send me an email stating that, that you would fall under that category in terms of being paid with federal dollars. So with that being said, time spent in preparation for this meeting will be estimated by PAG staff who are knowledgeable of the agenda and associated meeting materials. At the conclusion of this meeting, the session report will automatically calculate your time spent in this meeting. Time spent working on PAG or RTA initiatives, programs, and special projects may also be eligible for consideration for matching funds. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and move to the next item on today's agenda, which is service provisions. So service provisions is mapped out in the ADOT fiscal year 2023 Coordinated Mobility Program Guidebook. And as a subrecipient or potential subrecipient of FTA Section 5310 funds, this is an important guidebook to be familiar with. So in your approach to being familiar with this particular document on page 46, it actually talks through the service provisions. And so with that, ADA basically has a standard practice of specific service and operational provisions for transportation providers. And as subrecipients or potential subrecipients of FTA Section 5310 funds, we want to make sure that we are in alignment with that. So ADOT actually looks at subrecipients regarding the status of following ADA transportation service provisions. And they do that through management reviews, site reviews, or audits, if you will. And so I just wanted to kind of bring to our attention or a reminder around some of the things that are mapped out in or outlined rather in the guidebook, and just kind of open it up for discussion about best practices and approaches to making sure we are adhering to those standards of practice and what are the opportunities to perhaps enhance those. So the first bullet point, if you will, on the service provisions list within the guidebook talks about procedures to ensure wheelchair lift equipment vehicles are available. And so that obviously is a reflection of your fleet composition, right? So whether or not any of your vehicles have lift equipped vehicles. And then if that obviously, if they are functional, are they well maintained? Are they operable and in service for people to be able to utilize those lifts? And the other piece is, of course, the other side of that, which would be the ramp and any securement provisions that would go along with those that might be using a wheelchair lift or a ramp to be able to gain access to the vehicle. So with that, the maintenance about those accessible features is going to be a top priority in making sure that a vehicle is not out of service beyond the threshold. And there are particular requirements in terms of when or how long a vehicle can be out of service. And a lot of it has to do with population in the particular service area. So make sure you are familiar with the rules on that. The other piece is about just making sure that we're allowing adequate time for boarding and disembarking. And of course, that's perhaps more well-reviewed in terms of public transit spaces, but I think it's still important for us to be cognizant and aware of, even if we are perhaps not in public transit, but more in the nonprofit space, if you will, because it's still in alignment with ADA guidelines. The other part is for those that are in public transportation, announcements of stops and how that works with regard to making sure people are aware of when the stops are coming up and recognizing the different needs of different riders, especially for those that might be deaf or hard of hearing. And then, of course, service animals, making sure policies and procedures are in place that are in alignment with ADA. And then, of course, any service to persons with respirators or portable oxygen is another piece to be keeping in mind. And I know within public transit, there are usually some guidelines with regard to how many bags or pieces of property, if you will, that people can bring onto a public bus. And so how does that tie into things of that nature in terms of people who are using respirators or portable oxygen, just in making sure that we have policies that acknowledge those needs. And then, of course, any public information or communications that allow people with disabilities or people that would need the services that are provided through FTA Section 5310 to be aware of the services that are available. And I know within the grant application that is coming up in the early part of 2025, those pieces, as well as many of these service provisions, are asked of you in terms of explaining those particulars. So just making sure that you're familiar with those, you know what your policies are, how your procedures are in alignment with some of the pieces that I just alluded to will be important. And then the last part is just making sure that according to ADA requirements, your drivers and any related staff training with regard to wheelchair securement and sensitivity to passengers is not only up to date, but is an ongoing practice, and looking for other opportunities to develop best practices, or of course, these are all opportunities for coordination within the region. So on that note, I thought we would just kind of take a moment to discuss what are the different practices that different agencies are using right now to make sure they're in compliance with these pieces, and making sure that they're taking note of any of the items that might need some fine tuning, or might need to take a closer look and see, how can we glean best practices from other agencies to improve those elements. And then, of course, I just want to make sure that the other pieces that aren't overlooked is that as a subrecipient, you should undertake all reasonable means to provide for the needs of both those with sight or hard of hearing in terms of your communication regarding those transportation services that are provided. So whether that be Braille etch signs or other forms of written communication, as well as telephone devices for those that are deaf or hard of hearing. And then, of course, any type of facility improvement that would be commensurate with that, that's covered under the ADA. So I just want to make sure people are paying attention to that paragraph that follows those bullet points, because that paragraph can often be overlooked because we kind of get in the habit of just looking through bullet points and kind of looking for what jumps out at us, and it can be easy to kind of overlook that paragraph. So let's start with procedures to ensure both wheelchair lifts and, of course, ramps and any kind of securement is not only available, but is being well maintained. So if anyone would like to kind of share what their process is or what their practices are for this, I think that would be helpful. It'd be a good place to start. And for those agencies that are perhaps newer in terms of receiving funding for FTA Section 5310 or considering applying for this, I think this can be helpful to shape some context for what agencies are doing to be successful in this particular space. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor for anyone who would like to share what they're currently doing.
Hey, Janine, this is Carmen with CLP, with Catholic Community Services. And we use our wheelchair lifts and our straps daily, multiple times a day. So it's really important that we maintain a safe vehicle and safe equipment. That equipment is checked daily. The drivers are supposed to do a walk around, and that includes checking the wheelchair lift, checking to make sure that all of the tie downs are working, that nothing is broken or damaged in any way. Additionally, there's a monthly checklist that the supervisors perform. And we consider the wheelchair lift part of the routine maintenance. So when those vehicles go in for an oil change, we have a mechanic that will also check that kind of equipment to make sure that it's still in good working order, because those wheelchair lifts do require a certain amount of maintenance. They require lubing and making sure that all of the components are working efficiently, that nothing is clicking or hanging up in the movement, the up and down movement. So we try to incorporate that into our routine maintenance, but also a daily visual check from the staff.
Great. Thank you, Carmen. I appreciate that. I think those practices can go a long way, because I know for those that use either the ADOT inspection stations or use a third party and submit their inspection report. If you have a vehicle that has a lift on it, that is one of the pieces that they will check. And if anything is not where it should be, it could contribute to the failure of an inspection. So, and that can kind of, create a multitude of challenges, not just from a service perspective, but also a compliance perspective in terms of having an issue with a lift being inoperable beyond the point of time that's accessible and relative to the requirements that are outlined in the circular based on fleet composition and population size, et cetera. So thank you for that. Anyone else? Anyone else have any best practices that you use with regard to lifts or even ramps or securements that they would like to share?
Janine, this is Mike from Oro Valley. Yeah, the
Hi,
same
Mike.
thing as was previously stated. Drivers are required to cycle the lift before they take off on a route every day. Even if that vehicle was used in the morning and then a different route in the afternoon, they have to cycle that lift, which is going up and down. Once a month, we have a tracking sheet that lists all of the total cycles for that vehicle, for that lift. And so, according to manufacturer guidelines, every 6 months or 750 lift cycles is to be inspected. And there's a 6-month inspection and an annual inspection. The annual obviously is just a little bit more involved. And so you have to have a mechanic or someone that's certified to be able to do the inspections and all lubrications and adjustments and all that fun stuff. So we do that. Usually for us, that inspection comes around every 5 months, just because of the number of times we use it. But again, it's manufacturer guidelines is 6 months or 750 lift cycles for the Braun and Rikon lifts.
Thank you, Mike. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, your organization actually went a step further with being able to get certified to work on your own lifts. Is that correct?
Correct. We working with Braun and Edmund at ADOT. We went through a class to get our own mechanics certified to do these inspections. If there's anything that's actually wrong with them, as far as, this is broken or that's broken, a switch or whatever, many of those still go to Arizona Bus Center, or sometimes under warranty back to Model 1 in Phoenix. But yeah, our mechanics can do the inspections, lubrications, all that fun stuff.
Good. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else I see we had a couple other people join us, so I'm going to circle back in a moment and allow the opportunity to introduce themselves. But anyone else with regard to lift or ramp or wheelchair securement practices? Okay, so before we move on to another item on service provisions, I want to circle back with those that weren't able to introduce themselves earlier, and that was Steve Nath and Shaylin, but I also see Ryan Gillespie on the call. So maybe start with Ryan, if you would like to introduce yourself, your organization, and a brief overview of the services you provide in the region. Go ahead, Ryan. Ryan, can you hear me? I'm not sure if Ryan can hear me, so I'm going to move to Steve to give Ryan a little extra time to see if there's a tech issue. Steve, if you'd like to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, good morning. I'm Steve Nath. I'm the operations manager for Hope Inc. and Irma's assistant.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate you being here as well. And then Shaylin Toomey. Okay, not sure if Shaylin can hear me or not, or if perhaps her audio is just not working. So just want to still acknowledge both Ryan Gillespie, who's from United Community Health Center, and Shaylin Toomey, who's from Frederick Moore. So thank you both for being here. All right, so let's chat a little bit about some of the other pieces, which would be with regard to both service animals, for those that have riders that benefit from service animals in terms of policies and procedures that they have in place that are in accordance with the ADA. And then we will segue also to any service provisions regarding persons who might use either respirators or portable oxygen in terms of any policies or procedures that you have in place to allow for that service. So let's start with service animals. Anyone like to share their just kind of a brief overview of their policies or procedures that they have in place for that? I'm gonna make sure I don't overlook any hands up here. So I know we have Mike Alexander with his hand up. So maybe Mike, if you'd like to go ahead and share.
Ours is pretty basic. We go over this during our initial training and on occasion the refresher trainings. We allow animals, period. They just have to be on a leash or in a containment. Obviously, don't let them on the seats and all that stuff. They have to be under control of the owner. We haven't had any issues in our scheduling program. We have a button we can click when we know there's going to be an animal on the bus, trying to keep from having two different dogs or different animals on the bus at the same time. So when we're doing our scheduling, we allow for that as well. But it's fairly small. During the training, we also make sure that everybody knows, if they're being used on the lift, make sure you're cognizant of the temperature, because the lift is metal, and then the moving parts. So you have to make sure you know where the dog's feet and tail are at when you're moving that lift up and down. So that's basically what it is for us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Anyone else would like to share any policies or procedures they have regarding service animals? Right. So I think the other piece that I wanted to touch on as well was with regard to persons using respirators or portable oxygen. So I'm just being mindful of policies or procedures that you might have in place for that, or perhaps the need to develop them if you don't already have them in place. especially for potential new applicants. Anyone like to share how they accommodate that need or any policies that are in place for that? That one might be one to kind of do some research on and see where everyone sits with that. Just because we're not necessarily having a big discussion about it right now, and that might just be because based on what people on the call their scope of work is, that might not be their expertise, so that's perhaps not appropriate for them to share. So it doesn't mean no one is complying with that, just you might not have the people that are able to speak to it. So just kind of make a note of that and see what internal follow-up might be appropriate for that, just to make sure that that's something we are cognizant of and in compliance with. So that the other piece would be examples of how we're meeting the needs of those that are either deaf or hard of hearing, and then of course those that are visually impaired or blind. So if anyone would like to speak to practices that they implement or policies that they have to best meet the needs of those individuals, I think that would be helpful, especially for those that that is not the core population that they serve on a regular basis. I know we have people on the call that are perhaps from organizations that's their expertise. So if anyone would like to speak to that, that would be, I think, really helpful for the group. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up for discussion around that. And look for some hands raised. So maybe bundling the two is a little confusing. Let's see if we could just start with those who are deaf or hard of hearing, how we have practices or procedures in place to ensure we accommodate for that. Anyone would like to speak to that?
Janine, this is Mike Oro Valley. We actually
Mike.
had a passenger, this was a while ago, a passenger that is hard of hearing was asking about being able to access reservations online. And we actually, at that point, had just put it online. So having our reservation, you can register and do reservations online. And now people can also see all future trips and see the bus as it approaches on the day of the trip. So people that are hard of hearing, they don't have to call, they don't have to do that kind of stuff. They just go online and book, see their ride, see everything, and they don't have to actually communicate on the phone with anybody to be able to get rides. So this has been a big help, I think, in that area.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike. I appreciate that. Anyone else like to comment or add to that? Great. See if I'm missing anyone's hand up here. All right, well, let's look at those that are blind or perhaps have a visual impairment. To state perhaps the obvious in terms of how do we support those individuals in terms of being able to recognize that their transportation has arrived and is there and available to them. They're able to, safely board the vehicle, etc. So if anyone would like to call at the moment, so I'm looking to see if perhaps they join, but I don't see them at the moment. But if anyone does have some practices that they use for serving their riders that might have some kind of visual impairment or blindness, that I think that still would be helpful. I don't see anyone's hand up. So again, this might be just because the folks that are on this call, this is not, particularly their forte and not comfortable speaking to those elements. So doesn't mean there aren't any provisions like that available. But for good measure, I think it's important for all agencies to take a look and see what their policies are, and what their service provisions are to be able to best support those that might have either deafness or hard of hearing, and in the same breath, for those that might be visually impaired or blind, because it does say that subrecipients should undertake all reasonable means to provide for those needs. And so making sure that we do have some policies or practices and trainings in place to be able to provide that, right? So just kind of make a footnote of that if you haven't already, and especially if you're potentially a new member to the working group or considering applying for funding in the future. Service provisions as per the guidebook is an important component. And so just being familiar with those requirements is going to be helpful. All right. And then the last part I just want to touch on is about driver training and related staff training, specifically around wheelchair securements and, of course, passenger sensitivity, because we have people that use the services with a broad range of needs. And so it is one of the things that is asked in grant applications for those that might apply for 5310 funding in the future. So being aware of what those ADA requirements are as they pertain to driver training and related staff training will be important. So let's go ahead and open up for discussion. What are the different trainings agencies are putting their drivers through, and of course, related staff through, right? So staff that have any kind of direct contact, either verbally or physically, with riders would be pertinent to this. So I'm going to go ahead and see if we have any hands raised in this particular category. Anyone have any practices they'd like to share? Any thoughts, concerns? Oh, I see Mike. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay, Mike with Oro Valley again. So we do have our initial training plus annual refreshers, and then also if there's any special needs that we do additional training on. But we have cameras on all of our vehicles, so we're able to do any kind of evaluations through that. So through the securement of wheelchairs, in the past, we've had to do additional training. We called it wheelchair rodeo, where everybody had to go through and secure each other, just in not a classroom, but in the bus kind of training. And we feel that was a huge help in getting everybody on the same page as far as what exactly they had to do. When we go through the initial training, there's a lot of information that's coming at them, and so sometimes they kind of start steering off and go their own direction. So a few years back, we recognized that after that initial training, in a couple months, we do another follow-up evaluation for new people to make sure that the securement is correct. In the past, we've had issues where our drivers were only using 3 of the cue strains, or maybe not using a seatbelt, or different things. So during this wheelchair rodeo, getting everybody involved in doing it, I think that went a long ways in getting everybody on the same page, doing the securement properly and the same way to make sure everybody's doing it safely.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. And on that note, for all the topics that we've kind of briefly visited today, one of the benefits of being part of the working group is you just kind of have great access to other agencies that can be really helpful resources for different things that you're navigating. So for example, purposes only, if your fleet has historically only had ramps and perhaps you're contemplating adding to your fleet a vehicle with a lift, reaching out to agencies that have had fleets with lifts in them for a long time and really understand what is expected and required to maintain them appropriately, and even just kind of a glimpse at the associated costs with that. I think that can be of value for your own planning purposes, but also to kind of enhance your own policies, procedures, and maintenance plans that might be associated with that. So, tap into those resources, and in the same breath, for things that are pertinent to either like service animals. Sometimes a lot of the public agencies have policies in place with regard to that, because perhaps they have to accommodate in that way a little bit more often than perhaps some of the nonprofits would. But as a nonprofit, that need could present itself, and it's important to be prepared well in advance of that need. And then the same with making sure that we can meet the needs of those that either are blind or have a visual impairment or are deaf or hard of hearing. Making sure that we have practices and policies in place to communicate not only the transportation services offered, but also meeting people where they are in terms of their accessibility to these services. So if you're kind of grappling with how do we develop a plan, because this is all brand new to you, or you're taking a step back and saying, I think there's an opportunity for us to revisit our existing plans and see what enhancements can be made, I would really encourage you to reach out to agencies that perhaps specialize in meeting those needs, such as like Savvy or Catholic Community Services with their community outreach program for the deaf. They might be able to give you some really great insights and training tools, or at least a healthy perspective on things to consider. So I'd encourage you to do that. And then, of course, any related staff training, whether it be the wheelchair securements or passenger sensitivity, it can be really helpful to reach out to other organizations and see what types of trainings they provide for their agencies, and what is the scope and breadth of those trainings, and how do they navigate it, and is there an opportunity to perhaps partner with them in that, meaning an exchange of sending your own staff to their training and perhaps having them send some of their staff to your training. And all of those efforts can go a long way to enhancing not only just best practices across the region, but regional coordination efforts. So I'd really encourage you to do that, because I think both agencies win or benefit in that. And if you've ever had to teach someone something, just by going through the exercise, you usually unpack something that you need to sharpen your saw on. So there's always value in teaching someone else something as well. So with that, let's go ahead, if there aren't any questions on service provisions, let's go ahead and move to the next item on the agenda.
Hey, Janine, I have a question.
Go ahead.
It's
Yeah,
Mike
Mike.
from Oro Valley again. When
Mike.
I just sent you a checklist for securement, so if anybody wanted that, it's a step-by-step, do this in this order. You shouldn't have an issue with wheelchair securement. But my question is there, with the group here, is there any kind of interest in CPR training? We have a person that's a certified trainer that used to do the training for the police department that he worked for. And so he's now a certified CPR trainer. I just wonder if there was any kind of interest. I can see if I can open that up to anybody that wants to send people to it.
Thank you, Mike. That's a really great ask. I'm just going to go ahead and allow for those that might have an interest or would like to kind of circle back internally to find out if that's something that their organization would be interested in, but not can't necessarily speak to it at this moment, but at least they're open to asking the question internally. So if anyone would like to respond to Mike's offering, that would be great.
Hi, this is Jess. I can't speak to it, but I would like to circle back with the team at Fellowship Square and see if they'd be interested for sure. Thanks for offering that.
Great. Thanks, Jessica. Anyone else? Great. And then Mike, I appreciate you sharing the checklist for securement. So I can go ahead and send that out to the group. And I believe in a previous working group meeting, you had also shared some materials for best practices. I believe it was around maintenance that's tied to some of the things that we talked about today. So if it's still appropriate, I can share that with the group as well. I just need your permission, Mike, to do so.
Absolutely. Please do. Make it easier for yourself. Make it easier for us anyway. So,
All right, I will send that to the group and people can kind of glean that and take what they would like from it. And then, of course, reach out to Mike and his team with any questions or clarification that might be needed. Great. So thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. All right. So is there any other questions or comments before we move to the next item on the agenda, which is performance and progress reports? All right. I don't think I see any hands up. So we're going to go ahead and take that as a nod of approval to move to the next item on the agenda. So, depending on when you were added to the listserv that allows for you to receive a lot of my emails that are pertinent to the efforts associated with FTA Section 5310 funding through ADOT. You may have received my kind of reminder email regarding performance and progress reports. And if I could have my IT team just put the slide back one, yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. Regarding performance and progress reports. So I sent out an email with some important reminders, and all these things are in the guidebook for you to revert to on your own accord. And I do encourage people to revisit the guidebook, especially when a new guidebook is published. Because one of the things is things change. Some guidelines can get added. Some of the context can be added. And sometimes there's perhaps new rules or a policy change. And so ADOT usually does a really good job in the first few pages of the guidebook, kind of mapping out what's changed. So you kind of get that high level view that says, okay, if you're familiar with the previous guidebook, here's a cursory view of what's changed. And then you can go ahead and seek for additional information within that guidebook pertinent to those pieces that they've shared that's changed. This way you don't have to kind of hunt for it. You just kind of already know in advance what's changed. But with that, some things have changed over the last, 8 to 10 years, right? Depending on how far back we want to rewind the tape, regarding performance and progress reports. And I think there's been perhaps just an opportunity for some clarification. And in case either you're new to this particular type of funding, and you're like, what is a performance report? What is a progress report? I don't even know what that means. Or you've heard it before, but you thought they were synonymous, or if you thought that these perhaps synonymous terms only apply to certain types of funding and not others, or you thought, oh, it only applies if you have vehicles on lien, whatever your thought process is, I just want to take a moment to kind of clear up perhaps some misunderstandings and allow that to serve you in making sure that you're up to speed, make some mental notes to perhaps revisit the guidebook as appropriate, and then if most importantly, reach out for support or clarification on anything that still might not be super clear in your mind. So much like the emails shared, there's basically 3 reminders, but they're all pertinent to performance and progress reports. So the first thing is purpose of submitting the reports is to submit all the appropriate information to ADOT that's commensurate with the funding that you received, right? And so that's where it starts to break down between performance and progress reports. And as a reminder, quarterly reports are due quarterly, right? So the next quarterly report will probably due, you can guess for it, it's in January, right? So January is going to get here quick. A grant cycle is going to open up for 5310 funding. So it'll be easy for that to kind of slip out of people's mind because they'll be focused on the grant cycle. So just make sure that in the midst of all of that excitement, you don't forget about submitting your quarterly reports. So first reminder regarding performance and progress reports is that if you're receiving what we refer to as capital equipment and such as a vehicle, you have to provide performance reports, meaning what are you doing with regard to how you're using that vehicle. And in that particular spreadsheet, you'll see a lot of different data points in terms of trips and miles and things of that nature. And we're not going to go through all of the particulars because in the quarterly report template that you should have, and if you don't have it, I can resend it. It spells all that out for you. For those that are using the workbook in its entirety, you'll notice that it's broken out by each respective month. And then if the formulas are working the way that they should, it should pull into the form. That's the only form that really ADOT needs. They don't necessarily need the entire workbook, but the workbook is designed to serve you well because it will pull it from month to quarter and then from each quarter into the end of the year. That could be helpful depending on what management systems you use to collect data. For some agencies, the workbook is more cumbersome and less of a help because they have very efficient tools that they use, and all they really need is just that one pager that ADOT requires. For other agencies, the workbook is really helpful because perhaps their data management system isn't quite as robust. And so you choose what works for you, whether it's the entire workbook or your own methodology, but just keep in mind that the one page that actually says ADOT on it is the report that you have to serve up to ADOT quarterly. And so make sure that if you're familiar with that, know how to fill it out, you have questions or need clarification on anything, please reach out. So as a reminder, that Excel-based spreadsheet or form is going to ask you information about performance. And like I said, it could be about number of one-way passenger trips, your service miles that you provided, types of clients served, the geographic areas, I think is part of it, that is covered through the use of that particular vehicle. Okay. And of course that was funded through $5310. So then the other part is for performance report is to remember that those reports are for all vehicles that's used by a subrecipient, meaning that you received 5310 funding for. Let me retract that. I'm saying it wrong. So if you're a subrecipient, and that means that you have received FTA Section 5310 funding, that means you are a subrecipient. But when you deliver your performance report, you're reporting on all vehicles that are used in what I would refer to as like a 5310 capacity, even if they were not purchased with ADOT funding. Okay, so if you're a subrecipient, not currently under a grant agreement with ADOT, you still have to submit quarterly capital performance report. And that's where a lot of people think that they don't have to do it because like they have vehicles that are off lien, because there was a time when ADOT would take vehicles off of lien and you would still have them in your inventory. And so some people feel that that means they're no longer under a contract or under an agreement with ADOT and don't have to submit a quarterly report. And that's not true. The rules have changed, and the guidebook says until the vehicle is disposed of, you have to provide the reporting on that particular vehicle, even if it's off lien. So I want to make sure people are aware of that so that their reporting is accurate and they're in alignment with expectations that are laid out in the guidebook. The second reminder I have is, let's say you're receiving operating funds, right? So you have to submit that along with your reimbursement request, much like anyone who is submitting a reimbursement request for preventive maintenance. They have to upload different documentation. But for operating funds, you're going to submit your report in alignment with your reimbursement request. And again, it's still performance report, but it's under the operating section of that same report and usually is towards the bottom. So again, it's an Excel-based form, and it's going to provide information to ADOT about your performance. I believe there's even some RIA data and some budget data in there. And you want to serve it up in the template that's provided by ADOT. It's included in that workbook. And so again, the only section that ADOT really needs is the ADOT form, but you're welcome to use the workbook in its entirety. However, it serves you well, but it's not a requirement to use the entire workbook. But what is a requirement is that you serve up that ADOT form that's included in the workbook. So the last reminder is about progress reports. And progress reports are for those that receive mobility management funds. And so if you receive mobility management funds commensurate with your scope of work, you probably laid out a plan, so to speak, that says, here's what we hope to accomplish with the mobility management funds. And so that progress report is going to allow for ADOT to see what have you accomplished as part of your milestones, if you will, or benchmarks in accomplishing what you said you were going to set out to do, and how it aligns with the reimbursements that you're asking for as you spend down those mobility management funds. So remember, for mobility management funds, if you are a subrecipient of it, that is when you're going to submit what is referred to as a progress report. There isn't necessarily a specific form for it. ADOT hasn't provided an ADOT form for progress reports, but it is your responsibility to serve up a progress report saying, here's where we are in relationship to what we've been working on as it was outlined in our scope of work with our grant application. So in our Exhibit A. So make sure that if you are a subrecipient of mobility management funds or have plans to be in the future, that you're just very cognizant of that. The data that comes from performance reports goes into ADOT's NTD data, which is really important because that translates into money into the region. So be cognizant of that. I encourage people to always be on time with quarterly reports. I encourage people to communicate with ADOT if they feel like they might be perhaps late or need an extension in serving up that report. And then if for whatever reason you come to the realization that you overlooked sending it for whatever reason, I would encourage you to still send it. Acknowledge obviously that it's late, right? But it's better to serve it up late and still at least provided the report because it is a requirement to ADOT, and then build a path forward to be consistent in being on time and submitting those same reports. I would encourage you to copy me as your mobility manager, or if you're receiving funding through other regions, to copy that respective mobility manager when sending your reports to ADOT, just on the off chance something gets stuck in a spam folder or gets stuck in someone's inbox and there's a question like, did X, Y, and Z agency submit a report? There's a chance that mobility manager might still have the email that says that you sent it as additional documentation, but of course, keep your own documentation of when you provided it so that if there is a question, you can speak to that. So, of course, file those reports away because it's part of the things that they would look for if they ever did a site visit or an audit is, how are you doing with regard to your submitting of the quarterly reports? Are they accurate? Are they on time, etc.? So just be cognizant of that. In the email that I sent, I did give examples of the different templates that were used for fiscal year 23, the current fiscal year 24, and then looking forward to fiscal year 25. So if there's any clarity that might be gained from looking at those templates, or if you have a need for any of those templates, if you're trying to play catch up on anything, or just want to take advantage of the workbook, maybe you only use the ADOT form, but are open to looking at the workbook. I wanted to make sure those were available to you. The last part is, like most organizations, sometimes there's turnover within an organization, and we get used to sending things to one person and then that person's no longer there, or they've been promoted and they're not necessarily managing those tasks anymore. It can be easy to lose sight of who do I send it to, right? So for those that have been with the program for a while, there used to be one person that a lot of people got comfortable sending the information to, and that person's no longer with ADOT. So I want to make sure that everyone is sending the information to the correct point of contact, which would be Aubrey Perry at ADOT. And in my email, I did provide her email address. So if you need that, please reach out to me. It is included in my email regarding quarterly reports. But if you can't find it or just need a little refresher, feel free to reach out to me. And then, of course, please revisit the guidebook and just be mindful that the guidebook was written before some of the staffing changes took place. So even if it refers to a few people at ADOT with regard to the 5310 program, those might not be as up to date as we would like. So just be mindful of that. And if you have questions, is this still the right point of contact for anything that's listed in the guidebook? It doesn't hurt to reach out to me or someone at ADOT and get confirmation. And so again, Aubrey Perry would be a good point of contact for any kind of clarification on points of contact. And then lastly, I would say is when we're talking about vehicles that you're supposed to be reporting on, if you have any question about which vehicles that includes, to making sure you're capturing all of them. And then Shepard at ADOT is a good point of contact regarding everything in the vehicle space. So if you don't have his contact information and you need it, feel free to reach out to me as well. So just going to open it up for any questions, concerns, commentary, if you will, on this particular topic. And then depending on how many questions we have, I'll open it up to people sharing how they navigate this particular compliance requirement, and now how they're able to be successful, not in just doing the reporting, but making sure that the reports get submitted to ADOT on time. And I think those could be helpful tools or reminders for everyone, whether you're a seasoned subrecipient or someone that's considering applying for funding in the future. So I'm going to just go ahead and open it up for questions first, and then move to any kind of like best practices, if you will. Anyone have any questions or concerns about that information? Not seeing any hands up. I would just remind everyone that the quarterly reports is a component of compliance. And for those that are familiar with the grant cycle and might be considering applying for funding, it is a component that's evaluated. So just be very mindful. Compliance is always a part of the application review process. So this will be one component of compliance. So again, I would encourage you to kind of see where you sit, and if any of your reports may have been sent to perhaps the wrong person, just kind of help clean that up. And I would encourage you, if you do send it to the correct person, which would be Aubrey Perry at ADOT, that you copy me, just so that I'm in the loop. I kind of know that it's been taken care of. And then if there was any questions, I might be able to step in and support you well on that. All right, so any best practices, any thoughts on this, on how people navigate this compliance element, are able to be successful in not only doing it correctly, but timely. I don't see anyone's hands up. And again, this might just be because some of the people that are on the call, this isn't what they champion. They might delegate this task to someone else. So again, what I would encourage everyone that's on this call is if you've taken some notes on this, questions, or want to be able to relay some of this to those that might be championing this within your organization, that if there are any questions, concerns, or a need for some best practices, feel free to reach out to me and I could help support you in pointing you to some agencies that are known to do this well, and see how we can support you that way. But also, if you have any questions or need support from ADOT, I can assist with just answering your questions or facilitating the support that you might need from ADOT as well. So feel free to reach out to me, either by phone or email, whatever we choose. All right. I think I'm not missing anyone's hands up. I always get a little concerned that I'm missing someone. All right. So if there aren't any other questions, or if there aren't any questions, I'm going to go ahead and move to the next item on the agenda, which I believe is adjournment. We had a little bit of a spoiler alert earlier, right? Because you got to see number 5 in advance. But so if there aren't any other questions or concerns, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn today's meeting. I will be sending out the examples or best practices that Mike Alexander had shared to the group. And again, if there's anything that comes up based on what we talked about, as you reach out to other people internally in your organization, feel free to reach out to me, especially for things that might be closely tied to the upcoming grant cycle, just making sure that you're comfortable with where you sit with different things related to these topics, given the time frame for that. So, all right. Thank you so much, everyone, for investing time out of your day to be a part of the Mobility Coordination Working Group meeting today. I'm going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting. It is 11:05 on December 10th, 2024. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Janine.
Janine.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.